Hello, good evening. My name is Gerhard Schmiedl. I'd like to welcome you to our Mammoth talk. Today, our topic is ceramics and smelting. Therefore, we have two guests, like last week's. I'd like to introduce you to Yvette Marks. Hello, Yvette. She's laboratory manager and teaching technician at the University of Sheffield in the archaeological department. And of course, Franz Pieler, our chef scientist of the mammoths. Hello, Franz.
Hi, hello.
Yeah, for me, I'm just the moderator, just tell you how it works. We will have a talk, 15 minutes around. Our viewers, you at home, have the chance to ask questions. You will see the information on our webpage. You can write an email on online@mammoths.at or write us a message on WhatsApp or short message, or you can also use the chat function at YouTube if you are logged in. Yeah, that's all from me. I'd like to hand over to Franz and Yvette. It's time for the experts.
Hello, good evening. I would like to welcome you to our Mammoths YouTube channel, to another talk about experimental archaeology, today with Yvette Marks from Sheffield University. Hello, Yvette.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you're from Sheffield, as we heard before, and so I'd like to ask, what is your scientific curriculum, and what was your field of research, and what was your first encounter with experimental archaeology?
Yeah, thank you. So I actually started experimental archaeology when I moved to Sheffield to do my master's about 10 years ago. I wanted to do material analysis, so analysis of metals mainly, and Sheffield was recommended to me because of the expertise in analysis and experimental archaeology. Mm-hmm. And soon after getting to Sheffield, I realised that analysis and experimental archaeology goes hand in hand. In order to understand what you're seeing down the microscope or in the chemical analysis, you need to understand how things are made and their process. So I started off, as I said, during my master's, and then after that, doing engagement archaeology, so archaeology with local communities and schools, and then I went to work in a museum whilst doing my PhD. So during that time, I used experimental archaeology to engage visitors to the museum, to engage with school groups, to teach prehistory, because prehistory was added to our curriculum around 6-7 years ago, to our primary school curriculum. So students between the ages of 6 and 10 would start to learn about prehistory when they hadn't before. So even school teachers were having to teach something that they'd never studied before. And experimental archaeology is really important for a period in time where there's no written evidence. It's physical doing and it's material objects. So we did lots of flint napping and copper smelting and iron smelting, and that's really
this hands-on experience.
Yeah, absolutely, and
it creates an easy access for
and it was so rewarding because there were students who had struggled with history before or with science and maths, and they were getting to engage with subjects that they hadn't before, and they would come back to the museum time after time and bring their parents, and they would even come up to events and bring me projects they'd done at home. So that's really what made solidified my love for experimental archaeology. And then I was able to conduct a PhD looking at the early production of copper in the Aegean, so mainland Greece and the Cyclades. Right. And that research has continued, and it leads into my teaching. So now, as you mentioned, I'm the laboratory manager and teaching technician for material science at Sheffield. So I've stayed there as I've fallen in love with the place and the curriculum. And I now coordinate the modules in experimental archaeology and also the reconstructing ancient technologies for metals module. And I imagine that, as at all universities, our research feeds into the teaching. So I teach a lot about bronze production.
All right. Yeah. Well, Sheffield has a record for iron. It is an iron town, and it's the 19th century, probably older before that. I don't know. but it's very well connected and associated with metal and metalworking, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's led to me doing a number of iron smelts. Although my specialism is copper, I'm very experienced in doing iron smelts now, and I've actually had a publication with Exarch on one of the projects we did with students on iron smelting, and I think I've probably done in my 10 years over 60 iron smelts now, which is a very large amount. Impressive. And that's because we get schools requesting it. We do the Festival of Archaeology, we do woodland heritage festivals, and it's, as you said, it's the steel city. Irons in the soil and the blood of the city. So that's been really fun to do, and engage with so many different groups of people with that as well.
Yeah, we do that in Aspern as well, but although Aspern is no steel place, whatever. But still it works. Yeah, so it's a very easy way to get to contact and get people involved in archaeology. Yeah.
And I was going to say, I think because iron smelting is so visual, when you birth the bloom, that it's a spectacle, and that really gets people's attention. Where sometimes with copper, it's not as large a spectacle; it's more small amounts. So
indeed, yeah. As long as it all goes wrong, it goes right, it's okay. So if the furnace whatever starts smelting or so, then it might be a spectacle.
Yeah.
So we had that in Aspern once, so I know what I'm talking about.
yeah. I think sometimes, often it does go wrong, but I say this a lot to the students and to visitors and people engaged. I think you find out more interesting things when it goes wrong than when it goes right.
Indeed, definitely. Not only with iron or metal smelting, but actually with all aspects of experimental archaeology. So if it goes right and you got the result you expected, then so what? But if it's a failure, then you have to think about something. Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier the Sheffield Archaeomaterials Group. So would you probably tell something about them?
Yeah, so the Sheffield Archaeomaterials Group is a group of current students, staff members and alumni, and we come together to support each other's research, to share research, and we run a series of talks and events as well. So it's just a collaborative group of like-minded people.
You're unmuted.
Oh, sorry, I'm back.
You're back.
So it's a group of like-minded people supporting each other, and it's been really fantastic to see that group grow over the past 3 to 4 years. Doing things like this, have been able to come together and contribute material to an exhibition has been, probably the pinnacle of our growth over the last few years. And to start to get people to contact us about our research, and I think with the current circumstances over the last year, with things going online, we've been able to share our research more and be more prominent in the public view, and it's just been really nice to share things. It's a really good group, and I think you have something similar as well. Do you have a research group?
We do actually. We have the Experimental Archaeology Study Group from the ÖGUF, which is the Austrian Society for Prehistory and Early History, and it's a group of students basically, and they are kind of self-organized. They would also organize trips and experiments and sessions and even lectures, which is kind of the main thing. We have a theory lecture in courses in winter semester in University of Vienna, and in summer we'd have the practicum in Aspern, so which is in the last week of June or the first week of July usually. And we have all kinds of stuff. So it would be bronze smelting, iron smelting, smithing, flint working, bone, antler, wood, textiles, all kinds of stuff. And it's very, very diverse and very, very renowned actually. So it's a very long-standing tradition already. So next year we'll celebrate our 40th anniversary.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's a huge success. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. And I think these groups are coming together as well. With the Exarch conferences, and we had a local conference in the UK where different groups came, and it's just it's becoming more collaborative, and I think that's really important for experimental archaeology, is to share, to share our research, to share our work. And I think there has been, in the past, people have been scared to share experiments, especially if they've gone wrong, or they feel they're not academic enough to publish. So I think, these groups are really important to collaborate and to share this research, and exhibitions like this one as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the advantages, if you want to say so, about the present pandemic, that people would get much more used to sharing contents on public and on online, getting in contact, and aren't shy anymore to present something that might be, not very spectacular or a failure in experiments, whatever. But that's only the only thing that brings us, advances us and advances the knowledge and the context and whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we were talking about, very general about experimental archaeology, but the topic for today would be bronze smelting, and especially the pottery, which is not so obvious in the first place, because when we do talk about bronze technology, Bronze Age, it's mainly the bronze artifacts that are in the foreground and very in the forefront of presentation, but discussion. But to produce the metal, you made the point that pottery is essential, and there have been developed several types of pots and artifacts. So would you probably specify about on them?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that we wrote in the article was that when you look at Bronze Age archaeology with bronze artifacts, it is the artifacts, it's the pretty looking things that are often in displays in museums. And actually, I feel you learn much more from the material that came from the production process, and often that is ceramics. So even though I'm a metallurgist, I mostly look at ceramics. And there's multiple ceramics that go into producing bronze and smelting copper. So you have the clay structure, and sometimes it's not clay, but often it is. So the structure that will withhold the fuel to get the temperatures hot enough to smelt the clay, which is often called a furnace. You may have a crucible that could be used in the smelting and the consolidating and casting stage. You also have something called tuyères, which are clay pipes which allow air to be directed where you want into the furnace. And then you may also have clay molds as well. And these are quite hard to identify sometimes, or sometimes there's assumptions made on which ceramic it is. So a lot of my research has been looking at, as I said, at the ceramics involved with copper smelting and then bronze production, and trying to identify if the shape, the material composition, so whether the clay has sand or straw added to it, or grog from other things, or even sometimes slag, and whether that can help us identify what aspect it is. And then that's where experimental archaeology comes in, to test that theory, to then say, okay, if we think this is a crucible, let's test it and see if it works, or if you think it's a furnace. And I was also discussing with you previously how there's been misidentification of ceramics, especially ceramics from early metal production when temperatures weren't as high, especially with the smelting of higher percentage copper ores, because the temperature doesn't need to be as high to separate the metal from the ore, and you don't get some of the alterations to the ceramic that you would expect. So often when you're trying to identify metallurgical ceramics, you want it to have a slag stuck to the surface, or copper prills, or it to be vitrified. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes, because it's a lower temperature, it looks more like a cooking vessel. And as part of my PhD, my recent research, I've been re-looking at some ceramics from archaeological reports, and I think some vessels have been misidentified as cooking pots, which are actually metallurgical. So it's really difficult to sometimes identify the material.
Okay, yeah. So would they be very different, as when it comes to the clay composition from ordinary vessels, or would you state there is kind of influence that the bronze or pottery technology influences the composition of the other of the general pottery as well, so that there's an alteration in the whole pottery technology?
Yeah, I think the the ceramic material recipe for early copper smelting furnaces is similar to you would get for cooking vessels, so that the properties need to allow the vessel to be strong and withstand temperatures. So you put dried organics in to allow it to expand and contrast, and perhaps sand with silica to allow it to be strong. So they're similar. And some of the furnaces that I'm looking at, if I share a picture to show you, show you one. So can you see the picture now? Yeah. So this is a reconstruction of a furnace that I've been looking at from the Aegean. So these are from the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, and they're perforated furnaces. And these are a very fine clay. So some examples are only 2 centimeters thick, despite being 40 centimeters high. But these are similar to other ceramics that we get associated with pyrotechnological purposes, such as incense burners, half braziers, bee smokers. So there seems to be this kind of idea that if you're using fire and you're using ceramics, this is the type of style that you'd have, even though some of them are far from metallurgical purposes. They're, you know, domestic, household, and that's really interesting to me. And also when we're looking at the very early process of making metals, it seems to link to pottery production. So it links to, especially if you look at the Balkans, reduction wares. So that the way that they're making their pots and firing them to be reduced is the same conditions as is to smelt copper. So I think it's linked. I think it's all linked.
Yeah. So might even be the discovery of the metallurgical process be derived from some other production.
Yeah, perhaps. I think it could almost be people adapting their existing skills and crafts to this idea. So if you heat this stone, you can get a certain product from it, and we do that today, don't we? We adapt our skills and our tools to new ideas and new things.
But actually, as this furnace you showed, I know very similar items from like early Bronze Age, for example, from our region here, and they aren't generally connected to metal production. They would be rather for some cooking items, whatever, but they are not really specified, so nobody really knows what they were used for. But they would be found in ordinary household refuse, so that's not connected to any bronze smelting workshops.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes the only way we've been able to determine whether it's cooking or metallurgical is to do XRF analysis of the interior, and that on some examples that really do not look to have been altered enough or to have copper on them have actually showed high enough readings of copper to show that they were used with copper, which is really interesting. That it's almost like a hidden piece of evidence.
Right. You mentioned that the early copper smelting processes didn't involve very high temperatures. Well, I know that the beginning of the bronze technology, it wasn't an alloy of copper and tin, but rather of copper and arsenic. Would that have any effect on the temperatures involved? I mean, was it a low temperature process?
A lower temperature to other processes, and also there's different pre processes you can do. So like roasting the ore can then allow you to smelt it at a lower temperature and things like that. So yeah, definitely.
That's interesting, but it's not quite healthy, so probably they give And we also have very early, gold artifacts. Are there any evidences they had specialized crucibles and tools for gold working, or would it be quite the same, or aren't there any evidences so far?
I think it could be similar. So I was very lucky to excavate on the Keros project. So the project by Cambridge University excavating a bronze workshop in the Cyclades. And there we were finding evidence of lead production, copper and gold. And all the apparatus, the crucibles and the halves look similar. I guess you could do it in a smaller furnace if a smaller crucible, but it seems that actually it's quite comparable. If the main alteration seems to be the air source, so the furnace design will depend on the location, but also how it's being heated. So you'll get taller furnaces or wider furnaces, or the perforated furnaces, which would utilize wind power. So I actually think that the design would change depending on how they function rather than what's been smelted or cast in them, if that makes sense.
I see. Yeah. Well, I mean, the wind-powered furnaces, you wouldn't have them maybe anywhere. So, I mean, there would be also only on very, well, on certain sites where we would have enough wind. And I know this from iron smelting in Austria. There are some places where it has been argued that it might have been kind of wind powered on the base of a large slope where you have the downward winds that actually powers that. And we have well, it doesn't really work, but I mean the idea was there that we had a glass oven in Aspern, which was built the way that it kind of the open side was towards the windward side, and we had a kind of a palisade behind it with a door, and the function in the tension at least was that you could actually regulate the wind current with the door, either open or close it. But it doesn't really work the way we intended it to. But it certainly supports operating the oven when there's strong current, strong wind.
Yeah.
But
wind's really interesting, and I think you see it throughout history, even quite recently as well. There's a hill in Sheffield called Ball Hill because there was ball furnaces there, and you see it, as I said, from like the late Neolithic through. And what's really interesting to me as well is the perforated furnaces that I'm looking at in the Aegean. They seem to spread onto the Cycladic islands as they start to travel with the use of wind in canoes. So that wind's such an important thing for multiple things. It affects the harvest, it affects smelting. It's things that you wouldn't expect to have such an impact on the way of life and location and the time schedule. It's really interesting.
Would you even state that there might be a connection between the climate and certain furnace types?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the skill of the people. So these furnaces, I keep going back to what I'm looking at because I guess it's what I'm familiar with. Yeah. The thickness does change. So some of the sites they're 2 centimeters thick, and sometimes they're 6 centimeters thick.
Right.
And I think that might be dependent on the clay being used, but also the skill of the potter. So I really struggled when I was reconstructing them to get them to 2 centimeters thick, because I'm, especially 6 years ago, I wasn't experienced.
You wouldn't talk about skill, a vessel with 6 centimeters thickness. That's quite a massive thing.
And I think one of the things that we've realised this past year, so the material that went to the exhibition was from experiments we did in our autumn semester last year, and it was very, very wet. So even building a furnace that was much smaller than iron smelting furnaces or some of the other copper smelting furnaces we've done, we really struggled to build it because the conditions were so wet. So the clay becomes wet and it falls apart. So yes, the conditions would and the climate would really affect, I think, the shapes and materials used.
Yeah. Well, we have the same problem with the baking ovens. There is quite a common feature. I'm not so familiar with British prehistory now, but in on the continent we would have that. It's a kind of large pits we have probably dug out for clay or so whatever, and you have within the sides they would have baking ovens dug into the clay, and they were probably used, I don't know, several years, probably several times, I don't know, but they were open. There was no roof, whatever, over that. And in our museum, in the open air site, we wanted to show structures like these, but they had to build a roof for that. And of course, in a reconstruction, people, if they go there, they only see the roof, which wasn't there in the end. So, but that's the thing that they wouldn't, tolerate the weather conditions. So they would all collapse within a very short period. So that's, I'm quite aware that it's the weather is a big factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another question I wanted to ask you before is is it possible to identify now a crucible, for example, and to distinguish it from sherds of a tuyere, for example? Are they so specified to the properties needed? Or would it be just generally like with sand, whatever, to withstand the temperatures in general? So would they
So
have kind of a bucket full of clay and make all the tools they needed from one source?
it seems to be that things such as the tuyere and the crucibles are a similar material. And the main way you would tell the difference is the shape. So especially with a crucible and tuyere, the shape is very different, and it all depends on how many fragments, and if you've got a fragment that has a rim piece or if it's a body piece. It's the same with identifying pottery types. The furnaces can be different because sometimes it has dried organic, sometimes it doesn't. So there isn't, unfortunately, a clear differentiation between the materials used. Sometimes it can help you identify it, but it's not as clear cut. As I'm trying to I'm trying to collate as much information together to share with people, so then you can look at your site and look at my database and see. But unfortunately, it's not that clear cut. Every site's different and the recipes are different, but it can help. I guess if there's different tick boxes, and as you go through, if you've got 3 of the 5, that can help.
Okay, so and once you identify, like say a tuyere or a crucible, would it be an evidence for kind of a professional workshop, or could it also be kind of an amateur smelter, like people who would be farmers otherwise and use long evenings for some metalworking?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the period of time I look at is really difficult to identify that. So we do have clear examples of organised workshops that are not within the household. And then there is examples where activity has taken place within the household. And we do start to see when production centres are created, or when technology is moved away from the settlement. And especially with these windblown furnaces, there's a number of examples where the smelting site is not close to a settlement, and it's not close to the ore source. So they're picking a place and travelling across the sea to a place to smelt because something's that important. And it is hard to identify in some cases whether it's individual or organised. But what I think is different stages may take place in different places. So the smelting is more difficult, it requires more resources, but actually casting, once you've got an ingot of metal, that could be then cast in somebody's house. Or if you break your bronze blade, you could recycle it. So I think there's different activities taking place, and that can be hard to identify. But
yeah, well, I mean, it's a well-known phenomenon that bronze metallurgy advances the structure of society and hierarchy in a way, so that it starts, all the professional groups. So it would have smiths, of course, and people who probably produce charcoal. And how about the pottery? I mean, would there be specialized potters who produced all this technical stuff, or would that be the bronze smiths themselves?
I personally think, from my experiential experience making these furnaces, that it would be, in a lot of cases, a different person. So some of these furnaces are so fine and the structure is so difficult to make that maybe I think that a metal smelter would not have the same skills. Like, they're so comparable to a fine ceramic ware that you would, if you were looking at pottery in terms of like fine ware and storage vessels, you would say this was made by a highly skilled, potter who was making this. So I think that they are made by different people. But then there is examples of more crude halves where perhaps you can see some clays just being kind of put together quickly, and it's not as fine and delicate. So yeah, I think there's different craftspeople doing different aspects of the work, and that's when it becomes, it's definitely an organised activity within a society.
Fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. So we had that in an earlier talk about, well, it was glass beads, completely different. There was a big deal about workshop traditions and fingerprints of individual artisans. Would you go so far as to say that there are something like that, workshop traditions, or even that you could trace certain types of pottery to different workshops or traditions?
Something that's quite interesting with the toyers from this period is that some of them have decorations on, so almost like little carvings and little images. And you do wonder if that's one particular potter's kind of mark they put on all theirs, or if it's something that's more artistic, where it's like a leaf or something like that. And then I've been trying to map the variation in the design of these furnaces, and there's one location, there's two sites on one island where the furnaces are much thicker and are slightly different. The perforations aren't horizontal, they're slanted, the walls are thicker, so you can definitely identify different hands, different craftspeople. And then the sites where they're more comparable, I've been thinking, although I've not got any conclusions, do them furnaces originate from one settlement or one group of craftspeople, and they may have travelled to different islands taking their skill with them? Like, is it representative of one group of potters, or is it that they've got a different skill level or different experience with ceramics? So there's definitely variations, but I don't think yet there's enough of the other contextual information to decide if it represents a group of people, or there's that idea of how technology and craft is passed on. Like, are you taught by one person and you watch them and copy them and emulate them, and then you look at their skill, or is it the idea that's then adapted? And that's why there's variance. So we could talk for hours, I think, about that one question. And
don't get a clue in the end.
Yeah, and still don't know the answer.
And something else we have to bear in mind, that it was not the single artisan or craftsman who did his trade, and the family was at home and did something else, probably keeping the household or whatever. So it was the whole family, probably the whole clan employed in that field. So we have, I do Neolithic basically, so I have a bit affection to stones. And I came across some, basically called stone hammer stones, and were found in Bronze Age graves. And there was one I read about. It was from here in Lower Austria. It's a child's grave, Bronze Age, with 3 hammer stones in it. And we analyzed it, and we found traces of tin on that. And in another cemetery in Geitzendorf, which is a bit further south, there was a woman's grave, also with hammer stones, and there was also traces of metal on that. So it's quite obvious that the whole family, even the children, were working in that trade, and very likely they specialized on certain intermediate steps, whatever, grinding the ore, probably preparing some pottery, whatever. So or hammering the charcoal, whatever. So there are many aspects that you could employ all family members.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the ideas I had recently, although again it's an idea, is the perforations on the furnaces do range in size as well. And I was reading somebody else's thoughts on them, and they said that it could be the fingers being pushed through the clay to create the hole, and that would then result in the different size. And some of the perforations are very small, so it could be a child's finger of a very delicate hand. So and it always fascinates me when you find fingerprints or handprints, and the size of the fingers, as you said, can demonstrate that. But I think it would have been a family occasion. And when we've done experiments in the past, when we've had children there, they can get into places that you can't, to smooth the clay and to make things. So they're useful.
You're talking about experiments. Would you like to tell something about them? What did you do? Like your favorite experiments? About smelting. I think you also brought some pictures from.
I did, yeah. So I'll present my screen again. Can you see the?
I do. Yeah. We can see that. Yeah, it's Cypriot copper.
Yeah. So this is the experiment that the material for the exhibition came from. So this captured my attention because the discussions I was reading in the publications was discussing whether these ceramics were a crucible or a furnace, as we were discussing already. But the reconstructed dimensions are quite large. So if it was a crucible, it would be used as a furnace. And that kind of links into, I guess, terminology is important as well. But what was also interesting was the toyères. So the toyères that I've worked with in the past have been either very small cylinders that almost look like bulbs, like tulip bulbs, or longer cylinders, but they've been straight. And I think you can see in the picture with the picture at the right, the one that's described as an elbow toyère. The toyère has a shape to it, and that I found really interesting. And I wondered whether that change in shape was due to the size and the shape of the furnace. So to be able to direct the air into the furnace where that maybe a crucible was within charcoal, if that was necessary. So we reconstructed the furnace based on the published material, and I think the next picture shows some of the fragments from the furnace. You can see it's quite thin. The red colour is the outside, the black is the inside that started to vitrify and be altered. And then here you have.
We recognize this as a toyère, part of a technical potteries.
Yeah, exactly. So these could look almost like a roof tile or a cooking pot. It's really interesting. And then if we go back to the toyères, you can see on this end here, this is vitrified and has almost bits of slag upon it. So we reconstructed it, and I'll show you a picture of our reconstruction. So you can see the walls are quite thin. It's quite wide for the height. And the question I had was, how would the internal environment be with one air source? So with one toyère and one set of bellows, would we get it hot enough across this space? And this was part of one of the modules that I coordinate. So I presented the evidence to the students and allowed them to guide the reconstruction. So they created how the experiment would go. And I've got, this is when we built the furnace with the clay material based on the description in the report and to the dimensions. And then we found through experiments in the past that it's best to let the clay dry to go leather hard, and then to put a small wood fire inside to bake the clay, almost as if you were baking a pot in a kiln. And we do that before we put the charcoal inside, because we found when we've gone straight from building the furnace to smelting with charcoal, the temperature goes so high so quickly, the ceramic fractures and falls apart. So it's just a preparation method.
And, it's a perfect, it's closed completely. It's there is no hole for a toyère, so the toyère would come from above.
So there is a hole for a toyère. I don't know if you can see it. It's here. It's not in the picture. So this is one of the things we wanted to test. So we wanted to do multiple experiments where we tried putting the toyère in at the level of the ground, which would make sense, because this was believed to be placed on top of the ground, not dug into the ground, as lots of furnaces are. So lots of furnaces are sunk into the ground. So if the bellows were placed on the ground and the furnace was, one theory was that the toyère would go at ground level into the base. And then we also wanted to test the toyère coming in and then going down into the furnace to direct the air. I can show you a picture of the experiment. So you can see here we've got the bellows at ground level going in. We were really unfortunate with the weather, so it was very wet, which hindered temperatures, so the temperatures didn't get very hot. And then because of the pandemic, we did go back into a lockdown in England, and we didn't get to do the second experiment. So we did the first one where the toyère went in at the ground level, but we didn't get the chance to do the one where the toyère would come in over the top, unfortunately. But what we did learn from this one, where the toyère was at ground level, is only the very front of the furnace got up to temperature, and actually the material afterwards, when we emptied the furnace, only the clay at the front of the furnace, and at the front for me is where the toyère and the bellows are, only that clay was altered. So there was the black interior, like on the archaeological evidence, and the clay was red on the outside. But the rest of the furnace, you wouldn't have been able to identify a smelt had taken place within it.
Okay. And the tuyere, the bellows are blowing in straight or at an angle?
So this was straight, and then it went in an angle afterwards. It went in and then up.
Right. Just to ask, if I don't know if that's an option, to have it quite the axis angle to create kind of a circular current, air current.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? To think that the position of the tuyere could create, almost, a current of air inside it. And
well, I know that from baking ovens, we'd have that. You kind of light the fire on one side of the opening, and you could kind of get a circular current inside them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there must be a purpose, a functional purpose for that bend, that elbow shape to be in the tuyere, which is really fascinating. And it could be because of the size of the furnace, that's what's being created. But we need to do more experiments to investigate it more.
But we have such type of tuyere in Aspern. We have a bronze smithy, which is not really functional. It's basically for display. But we have this kind of angled tuyere there, but it's actually coming from above and blowing downwards on the crucible. So I don't know if that was ever tried out. So we'll have to ask our colleague.
Yeah, we tried that previously. So we've tried that with experiments relating to, I think, Balkan reconstructions, and that has worked well, especially if you manage to keep enough charcoal on top of the crucible to keep it reduced. You get a more direct heat and a more direct blast. So we have experimented with that with different furnaces, but we didn't get to that point in this experiment. But it's really interesting how different shapes can have a huge effect on the function.
Indeed, yeah. That's also very interesting and very, very important to communicate for students, for example. And you mentioned you're into teaching as well. You do courses in metal working and experimental archaeology in Sheffield University, is it? I guess.
Yeah. So I've been the coordinator for them 2 modules for 3 years now. This is my 3rd year, and this is. This material and this experiment was part of one of their modules where we're looking at reconstructing metals. And the Sheffield Archaeomaterials group supports with that. So they'll come along to the experiments. We'll have seminars with the students in that course, so that the metals course is a master's course and the experimental archaeology is a 3rd-year undergraduate and a separate master's course. And that's really benefited the students because they become part of a research community and they contribute to work that is published, and it's that environment that's so important. And I think it's that environment that has is the reason why a lot of students come to Sheffield, because it is collaborative from the very start and active in research and active in public engagement. So it's been really fun to coordinate their modules and to also to teach experimental archaeology. And we've got so many students now who have gone off and they teach it elsewhere, or they do it with museums elsewhere. And it's really, it's really heartwarming to see where it is going on in the world now.
Must be fine, especially as you mentioned earlier that the future of archaeology in Sheffield is not so certain.
Yeah, unfortunately, the department's been placed under review by the university. We've had a number of staff leave over the past few years due to retirement and other things, and the positions haven't been replaced because of COVID restrictions. So the department has less staff than usual, and we asked for help. We said we need more staff, we need to develop the department, and we were put under review, which we believed would be a supportive process to see what we needed, what resources we needed. And what actually came from that was a decision to close the department and just keep certain aspects of the discipline and move them into other departments. Now, this decision does have to be finalised. It needs to go to Senate and then Council. And actually the Senate meeting is next week. Right. So we're actively as a department petitioning this, fighting against it. we've 50 years we were supposed to be celebrating this year, the department, and we've got so many alumni and students, as I said, around the world who have come from Sheffield, and many of us have moved to study at Sheffield because of its reputation and because of its research outputs. And we do so much work in the community as well. So we are trying to fight this and demonstrate the importance of archaeology. So I can't believe a university would consider losing archaeology as a discipline, because it's such a vitally important discipline.
Really a great loss, indeed.
It's hugely important. I'm just going to share a screen with you that has some information with you. So I think a university considering closing a department and getting rid of archaeology, when it's so important to learn about our past, it's so important for the future, for building, for learning and sustainability. So we are trying to fight this. And
for our modern self-confidence and consciousness is very important and cannot be underrated. So to lose all that would be throw us back to the Middle Ages.
Absolutely, and I think that's why we're asking, our collaborators, our colleagues across the world to support us, to demonstrate how important it is, and to show the university how important it is. So we have a petition, which I've got a QR code there, so you can scan that image, or if you just search Save Sheffield Archaeology on Google or Twitter or anywhere, you will see our rally, our campaign. And we've had so much support already, and I'm sure many of you have contacted us with letters of encouragement and support or signed the petition. And I also think there's a problem across the world. It's not just in Sheffield, of funding being cut to archaeology or it not being considered as important.
On the COVID restrictions and all the the money was spent in billions, and that has to be saved somewhere.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we stand together, we stay collaborative, and we show how important it is to keep this discipline and how it can help us in the future. So thank you for letting me share that. And
you have success, and it's kind of not taking place.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Right. It's almost 10 to the hour again, and I thank you for the moment very much indeed, and would like to ask, are there any questions coming in?
Yeah, we got a few questions. Let me see. The first question would be, since when have people in Central Europe been able to reduce tin from cassiterite? Or was powdered cassiterite stirred into a copper melt? This also creates tin bronze. Do you have any idea?
So it's not part of my current research, but I do know it's in the Bronze Age in certain parts of Europe where they start to use cassiterite for tin bronze. I don't know if fans of you've got anything to add to that question.
Well, I mean, I mentioned before these evidences from this Bronze Age cemetery of Bogendorf, which dates to around 1700, 1800 BC, that we have real evidence of tin processing, which is very rare in its own right. So, well, we have tin bronze, all right, but actually, I'm not expert in that field, so I couldn't specify that any further. But estimation would be around 1900 BC, not earlier, in Middle Europe.
Okay, thank you. And the next one. Are there historic examples for metal smelting without the usage of clay, ceramics, or pottery?
There is some examples of rock-built, stone-built furnaces. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but when I was looking into wind-powered furnaces, there's some examples where they're cut into the slope, cut into the hill, and then stones are placed for the walls, and that works very effectively, because all you need is a structure that we've hauled the fuel to get hot enough to smelt the ore. So if you can do that with stones or something else, I think clay is often used because you can manipulate it and change it easier. And I know there's some examples from Cyprus where there's a stone foundation and then clay built on top. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
I don't know any of these evidences from Austria, so it must be probably wasn't found or not recognized, but might be there as well, of course.
I do wonder with stone-built furnaces if it would be harder for the material to look altered. So when we're identifying ceramic furnaces for smelting, it's often the changing colour or the material stuck to the surface.
The rock would have kind of a reddish surface, but they come from all kinds of heat.
Of different purposes, yeah. So it might be harder to identify. Yeah.
Okay, next one. Are there any differences in the development of metal production in parts of Europe? For example, Austria and the UK. Did it come up in the region sooner or later?
So I can talk about, so I'm looking at the Aegean, so I've looked at the neighbouring regions, so the Balkans and Anatolia, and it does appear differently. The technology seems to imitate other technologies, so things like pottery production or overuses. So it does seem to have regional differences, and there is a differentiation in the time it appeared as well. So yeah, and that's really interesting as well. And as we talk about in the report, bronze is being considered to be the stimulant for societies to be organised and things to progress, and that actually might not be the stimulant, but it might be a symptom of it. So as people start to travel and trade and see new things, and they start to, so this is the time where things start to change, and this can be a signifier of it. And there's definitely regional variants, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's always, probably not the technology alone, but I think society has to develop to a certain degree in order to be able to exploit the possibilities that the technology offers. So we have specialized workshops even before metalworking, like stone sickles, flint sickles, for example, would be kind of standardized items, or a certain type of antler hammers, axes, for example. They would be kind of standardized, certainly produced by professional workshops. And only I think in this kind of milieu that you would have that metalworking would actually be able to develop. So we have evidences of copper objects from the Middle Neolithic already. So, for example, the Venus of Falkenstein, which is a clay figurine. You probably don't know it, but it's a painted clay figurine with a kind of a pendant around the head in red, kind of a circular lunar-like shape object in reddish color, and it has been argued that it might be kind of a copper pendant, which may be, but it certainly didn't affect the society in the way that it did during the Copper Age. So I think it's kind of it's not a one-way situation that you have the bronze and automatically society will alter and advance. But I think society has to be ready for that, to accept the technologies.
And
and
thank
on
you
the
very
other
much.
hand, if I may continue, on the other hand, you have societies that developed a very complex structure, temples, towns, scripture, without any metal at all. So we have the Maya exhibition at the moment in Mistelbach, and they're a perfect example for kind of a Stone Age technology, if you want. But they certainly had a very complex society and lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So next one.
Mm-hmm.
With mention of arsenic alloys, were people aware of health risks and abandoned such techniques, or did they continue to use them?
I think, I don't know about in the Bronze Age, but definitely when you get to the classical period, I think they might not have been completely aware, but you can see symptoms of it. So if you think about the representation of the gods and the smith of the gods, Hephaestion, he was represented as having physical disability, which can be related to smelting and things like that. And I think there wasn't an awareness whether or not they understood it. And there would have been health implications, and maybe people would realise it was affecting the health, but not understand why. And there's been discussions in the past of smiths being considered as being dirty, or the activity dirty because of the smoke, and it takes place on the outskirts of the settlement rather than the interior. So I think there's an awareness what was going on, but maybe it's not a full awareness or which aspect of it was harmful. What do you think,
I think
Hans?
how to say, the social aspect, or whatever, the social position of smiths changed considerably over time. So, I mean, if you look at the early Middle Ages, for example, where we have written, or at least traditional evidence sources from the sagas, Wieland, for example, would be quite a good example. He was a specialist and very highly regarded, but he was taken captive and took very cruel revenge on the king who took him. So by killing his sons, I don't know if you know the story, but and he created kind of flying implements, like wings, and he flew away then. So he certainly was a highly regarded specialist. But as we go to prehistory, we have no evidence whatsoever. I mean, we have the graves with some tools in there, but we have no idea if other craftsmen would have had their tools with them as well, as long as they are from organic materials and preserved.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have 2 comments, no questions.
Mm-hmm.
Let me check. Yeah, it says Detlef Janssen assumed that elbow tuyers are used to blow directly into the crucible, since a clay crucible will not withstand the heat if heated from below.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've done experiments in the past, and I know many other people have that have been published, where the assumption is the air's blown down onto it, because when we've experimented it from below, the heat doesn't penetrate through the clay enough. So I think that is probably correct, but it's always good to test other ideas and other possibilities. And I think that idea fans had about maybe would the air be able to circulate around is really interesting. And the other thing that sometimes comes from having the tuyere directed on top of the crucible is it can be too oxidizing or even too hot. So it's very hard to get everything in the correct place. It can be so easy to go too hot or too cold. So yeah, but I agree with that comment. Yeah.
Just sorry, I have to ask something. I will forget it afterwards. I know. Is there any possibility? I mean, I know it from iron working that actually there is a kind of a glowing color, so you can actually judge, or somebody with experience can judge the temperature from the color of the glowing metal. Is that also the case with bronze?
I believe it is, yeah. And I also think that I can tell the temperature by the colour of the charcoal, and also the colour from in the tuyere as well. So because I've been doing this for 10 years now, and the more experience, the more you recognise. It's the same with baking or cooking. I can tell if it's an orange colour, it's going to be around 800 degrees Celsius. If it goes above 1,000, it's more white, and at what point it's yellow. So I think I can tell from the colour of the coals, the colour of the fire, how hot it is. And you can also see if it's reducing from the flames, obviously if it goes purple. And when you're smelting, you do start to get flicks of green in the flames. So there's loads of signifiers.
Right.
And then we do this test, and I don't know where it comes from. My old lecturer taught me it, where you get a green stick, so a stick that's still alive, it's not dried out, and you place it into the crucible. So rather than taking the charcoal off the top of the crucible and opening it up, you push the green stick through the charcoal into the crucible, and if the metal's liquid, so if you're trying to cast a bronze item, and it will bubble, and you can feel the bubbling through the green stick, because the liquid in the stick will start to boil and disappear, and you can feel it. So that's a method that I use every time I cast now, and it means that I don't have to remove the coals, reduce the temperature if it's not up to temperature. And I don't know where that comes from. It might be something that is being passed down from other experimenters. I don't think it comes from any archaeological evidence, but it works.
It would be hard to, yeah. But it's very interesting. Yeah, thank you. There was another question you mentioned before?
No, I think it was a comment.
Another comment.
A comment to the first comment.
Okay.
It says this coincides with our own experiments in northern Germany, and also slag glass residues on surviving crucible fragments. Yeah.
And that's why it's really fantastic to do discussions like this and to share information, because the likelihood that somebody out there has done an experiment similar to you, or has got some information that you can compare to, it's really great. And I'm loving being able to share our research and data more, and find out what other people have found out. So it's really exciting.
Indeed, it is, yeah. And once traveling is possible, once again, I would like to invite you very, very heartily to come to Aspern. Probably you want to carry out some experiments there, or
yeah, absolutely. We look forward to doing that.
There, so you were always welcome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
And if we survive, you're welcome at Sheffield as well.
yeah. Hopefully. Yeah. We are positive. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think
are there any questions?
No, that's all.
Right. Okay.
Just one thing. If you're interested in our topic, the viewers at home, visit Mammuts Aspern. If you're too far away or have no chance to come, you can see it here. That's our exhibition catalog. You can purchase it. Yeah, just write us an email or call us. It's really interesting. All 25 experiments are there shown in German and English. And one little forward look. Next week, we will have our last talk before the summer break with Jerzy Machacek. It's about an early medieval church, which record is about 1,100 years ago.
Yes,
in Moravia.
Yeah, probably just mention that the talk will be in German, since my Czech isn't good at all. So
yeah, and if the weather is nice, we will broadcast it directly from the construction area, so you can have a look at there. Yeah, I think that's all for today. Thank you to our experts. Thank you, Yvette. Thank you, Franz.
Thank you.
It's really interesting.
Indeed. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you to our viewers. And yeah, let's end this. It was really interesting. Have a nice evening. Bye. See you at the Mammuts.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.